kind of figure out how to run the software a little bit. Not really though.
Oh, are we recording? Yeah, we are.
We're just gonna edit it.
Yeah.
So what? Okay. So I gave you 30 seconds now. So what is your financial hot take?
That the United States government last month paying people 5.25% to essentially be risk free in
So
the
what does that mean?
treasury. Yeah, I mean, so the 20-year treasury in October hit 5.25% on annual yield. So for the 20-year bond, you're essentially able to park however much money you want to in that and get the yield of 5.25% on it. So if you're super wealthy, there's no reason why you shouldn't have all of your living expenses covered by the United States government right now.
All right, but like it's not even super wealthy though, right? Which I like. You're talking about super wealthy, but what's your definition of super wealthy?
Yeah, I mean, for anyone who's looking at the treasury, it's probably anyone north of 5 million of investment.
What, don't you think there's like a broader impact here than just like the super rich 5 million plus people?
As far as the treasury hitting as high as it is?
Well, I mean, if you part of the reason why the treasuries hit the level is because of inflation and long-term inflation expectations, right?
Right.
And so if you think about the wealth transfer starting from boomers to X millennial Z, right? Then what happens when all this wealth starts getting transferred over and you could be a Gen Z making 150 grand a year in passive off your parents' 3 million in inheritance, right? Which is not a crazy number for a lot of these boomers to be passing down to, say, one of two kids or even one kid.
It's not. I think the long-term ramifications is, I think, from a financial planning perspective, if advisors are still saying that inflation is going to be 2.5%, I don't think that's realistic whatsoever.
That's so stupid. Is anyone saying that besides like the Congressional Budget Office?
Maybe some financial advisor who's in his 60s and thinks that it's still at 2.5. I think it's more realistic that long-term inflation is creeping up towards 4. Maybe best case scenario, it's 3.5. But even then, like, I don't think like inflation is, unless it's like hyperinflation, obviously, but inflation is healthy, right? Like if you're in a stagflation environment, like that's not good either. Cause like wages are stagnant. Yeah. Wages become stagnant. So like if we go flat on inflation all of a sudden, or any sort of decline in inflation drastically, that's going to affect wages way more than, say, inflation would. Because like what people were accustomed to, and what happens is I think like behaviorally, if someone's making 150 grand and in 5 years they're still making 150 grand, behaviorally that doesn't make any sense. But if we're in a stagflation environment, like that's going to make sense. But people, I don't think about that, right? Like they think that, I should be getting an annual raise every single year, or I should be getting a bonus. But if inflation becomes stagnant, then I don't know, right? Like, I just don't
know. You touched on a few things, right? Like, so there's a difference between, I'd say, economic stagflation and financial stagflation. Right. So like economic stagflation is going to be tough with what you're saying based on just wages, where they're going, and the size of the labor pool. And I guess what I was trying to go to there was, okay, if now the 10-year and the 10-year's at 5 or close to, or spitting distance at 5, or tapped it, whoever had a 1 touch on the 5-year made a ton of money, or the 5% 10-year made a ton of money. Like, I guess here's what I'm thinking about. Like, part of this inflation thing is being exacerbated by the shift and the transition from a baby boomer driven workforce to a smaller workforce in Gen X, Gen Z, and millennial, right?
Yeah.
If now you're starting the wealth transfer of baby boomers down to there, and now these kids are getting, let's say, 100 year in passive as soon as their grandparents or parents pass, right? Then does that take more people out of the labor pool, which only makes wage inflation a bigger problem because there are fewer people. Like you have to pay people. I mean, I'm thinking for myself. Like if I was guaranteed 200 grand a year right now, or 150 grand a year right now, to just shoot the shit with you on Riverside every day, and then we can go play some golf, and then like just smoke a bowl and figure out what we're going to talk about the next day. Like, dude, we would be doing that all day, right? Like,
Yeah, I mean, you have a point, right? I think it comes down to, it's going to come down to it. It has to affect the workforce. It has to affect wages. Like it just has to. Like there's no way to cut around it. I think what you're going to see is I think you're going to see a wealth gap larger than even Congress is talking about over the last like 10 years, how everyone's talking about the wealth inequality gap. I think that's just going to grow exponentially because you're going to have all of this money inherited. I think even some of the private equity shops are talking about the fact that all these boomers, they can't find anybody to sell to, so they're going to have to sell for a discount to a bunch of these private equity shops because none of the Gen Zers or millennials want to take over some laundromat or some cookie shop or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I saw it come out of one of the journals I subscribe to with private equity, how they're looking at this massive opportunity to come in and take over these like car washes, for instance, was one of them that I saw, where like people will own it. They've owned it for 20, 30 years, but they can't sell it to their kids and they want to retire, but they can't. And so these private equity guys are coming in and just giving them like 70 cents on the dollar just for them to walk away.
Dude, I would take a car, to anyone watching this, if you have the opportunity to buy a car wash at 70 cents on the dollar, that is a cash cow, bro. Like especially the self-service ones, you're throwing the quarters into the lock boxes and stuff.
Like if you think about it, like the millennials and the Gen Z and just like that, those generations as a whole, they don't look at things like that. They don't.
What do you mean?
Well, they don't.
I thought Gen Z and millennials were all about the passive income dream, right? Like, wouldn't you think that owning a few car shops and like driving around and pick up your quarters is like
right? You obviously like you just buy one tomorrow, Jared. It takes what, like $250,000. Cool.
Well, I mean, I'll pay 80 cents on the dollar. Yeah, all good. Like if I'm making 150 a year in passive, what's $80,000?
Well, I think the problem is, and we were talking about this last week, is all these people talk about how you just need like 10 rental properties. It's like, right. Where the fuck are you going to get money for 10 rental properties?
Well, like those people are so screwed right now.
Oh yeah.
Like anyone, I think, that went into this whole property boom thing in the last 2 or 3 years off of COVID, this whole short-term rental thing. I mean, that's a hot take that did not come out pre-recording.
Wait, are you telling me that that the Burr method isn't going to make me $1 billion in the next 5 years?
What? I think the top tick of the residential real estate market was when I saw an Instagram post, and I think it was like one of those. I follow a couple of those, like Today Years Old or Get Rich accounts or whatever, because sometimes they're funny, and then they'll sprinkle in like the at dedication ads or whatever. I swear there was like this at dedication post or something from Today Years Old or one of those accounts, and it was just panning through these frat bros. I mean, like say 35-year-old frat bros who haven't grown up. It was about how many thousands of units all these guys had under control for how little equity. I think that was the top tick. Like just seeing that post, and then this guy be like, "Oh yeah, I got like $1 billion of units under control for like $1 million of equity." Like, dude. Those people are all done, right? Like when does like that stopped or not? Has it yet? When do we hear about all these apartment buildings starting to come for sale? Because like there's no way some of these guys are holding on to this shit.
Well, there's no way they're holding on to it, and there's no way the banks are letting them hold on to it, right? Because the bank balance sheet has to condense if we look at things from a macro level, right? I mean, you know that better than I do.
And all these loans were floating rate too, right? Which I think was something people didn't talk about. Was that a lot of these investors who were doing the Burr stuff were either taking hard money or these floating rate loans. They weren't going through, conventional agency sources and locking it 30 years, right?
Well, because like a lot of the methods, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of the methods to do the fast burr method or to get a ton of rental properties, you're not really going to find that through conventional banking resources, because it needs to be on a variable rate, not a fixed.
And I think that's probably what these guys are doing, like DSCR loans, basically, right?
Yeah.
Like these non-conforming DSCR loans. So like, you're buying a 7 cap on a 2.5% float, fine. And all of a sudden, if your 7 cap goes to a 6 cap and your float goes to 4, float goes to 7, you can't pay any amortization.
Well, also, like, because if you think about it from just like a lender's point of view, you have to, there's regulations around debt to income ratio. So if you are
not in the non-conforming space,
right, I'm thinking of the conforming space, right? So conventionally, if you were doing this the smart way, which is I have W-2 income of 150 grand, I'm going to buy a rental property every single year for the next 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
The 5th year, if you're making 150 grand, let's just say you have a 5%, annual increase every year. The 5th year, you're probably going to have a hard time having, JP Morgan Chase write you that conventional 30-year mortgage, because your debt to income ratio has now skyrocketed. So you're almost forced to go to the non-conforming way.
You are. And I think that you are. And that's why these guys got screwed in the first place, right? Because single family cap rates still haven't moved. They're the one residential asset class that has not widened cap rates since the 10 years gone up. Wow. Single family rentals are still at 4.5, 5 across the country. I mean, there's a bid from Blackstone, right? And then the other issue too is that I don't think Blackstone and BlackRock and Avalon Bay and all these REITs are destroying the residential market like everyone's saying. But at the end of the day, there is a bid. I think that bid is a lot lower now that the 10 years at 5. So you're going to have a lot harder time, I think, arguing, going in guns blazing if you're Blackstone. That being said, you still have a bid there. And cap rates are still defined by what's primary and owner occupant market. So with housing prices still on the highs for owner occupancy, you're not going to see a cap rate expansion because rents haven't caught up. And so you're still at 4.5. So you literally cannot get income properties qualified on conventional bases right now, just because cap rates are literally lower than their 30-year fixed mortgage.
So here's a question for you, because BlackRock, Vanguard, and I think State Street are secretly buying a bunch of real estate across America right now.
Yeah, you and everybody else. Yeah.
Do you see that turning into pre-Great Depression, where a bunch of corporations owned a lot of the real estate in America and rented it out, and then I think it was I forget the president right now. He had to come out with the Residential Mortgage Act to get them to get the corporations to release a lot of releasing a lot of the housing so that people could go buy it.
I don't remember that part of the housing market history. I'm still a new practitioner.
Maybe I just made that up. Did I just make that up?
You can make that up. I don't look. These guys acquired a shit ton of real estate from 2008 through 19, right? They were definite buyers, and people have been talking about the fact there was this bid, from Blackstone and Avalon Bay and other major REITs, American Homes for Rent, right? I mean, there are more than one single family investment company out there, and they did buy a lot of stuff because leading up to the 10-year exploding, because you had a differential between cap rates and 10-year, right? I think it's really hard to raise capital as a finance guy for single family housing if cap rates are at 4.5 and you could look at the 10-year and that's at 5, and you're not really worried about. I mean, if you're bullish on residential real estate, you're not bearish on the 10-year. So you would look at the 10-year at 5 and residential real estate at 4.5 and be like, why would I'll just wait. Right, I can park my money in the 10-year. Right,
yeah, I mean, you just proved my point earlier. What's the point? Just park your money in the 10-year or the 20-year and sit pretty.
Yeah, and that's why I don't think it's going to get any worse. Right, I don't think those bids are there nearly as much as people think they are. It's just. Do you
think we turn into a Japan?
What do you mean?
With Japan's just constant just constant interest rate hikes or keeping interest rates low and just increasing the deficit?
I mean, you're starting to see that not really work, right? I mean, cracks in the armor with the was it S&P downgrade or Moody's down? Well, Moody's downgrade, right? A few months ago. So like, look, you and I were talking about this 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Like okay, if you just project, and this was back when the debt was 25 trillion, not 34 trillion. If you just project 25 trillion at a 5% interest rate, you're talking about $1 trillion of debt, like debt service, which is 3 or 4 times whatever it otherwise would have been, right? Like this is now. The fact is, it's not $34 trillion and it's just ballooning. You're going to run another $2 trillion deficit. So you're adding $100 billion of interest payments every single year to, if you're running a $2 trillion deficit at a 5% interest rate.
To a declining population.
Into a declining population, a declining tax base, right? Arguably, inflation would have helped you, but you didn't get your fiscal house in order prior to the inflation. You try to inflate your way out of debt, so you stop borrowing and then inflate your way out of it. They just kept borrowing the entire way through, right?
Well, and then full circle here with a declining tax base. If you inherit money, as long as it's below the threshold of the estate tax, then where are you going to get where's the federal government going to get revenue from if these kids aren't going to work at 150 grand?
All right, let's stop this here because we're going to go on to that topic next. Where are we getting our government revenue from? That's amazing. All right, let's do that.
All right.